Hi, I'm Corey Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for engaging conversations about the topics that matter most in our culture. If you love nuance, if you want to better understand different points of view, if you're tired of the screamers taking all the oxygen out of the room, if you'll enjoy edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me, you love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. You know what we do. That's just what we do. Talk politics and religion and big stuff with cool people, interesting people with interesting backgrounds. We don't always agree, but we try to do it in respectful ways, and we're just having a lot of fun doing it. And as always, subscribe, review, do all that good stuff, and recommend us to a friend. We're trying to share what we're doing here. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and I am so grateful to my collaborators and co-producers on this endeavor, Emily Matthews and Jessica Stone. Shout out to both of you. Thank you for all you do and just for being the badass ladies that you are. And I am pretty pumped about who I get to talk to today. Our guest really needs no introduction. So I am just going to shamelessly steal right from the description of his new podcast, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh is a former U.S. congressman, a former presidential candidate, a radio host, and a man whose personal mission is to listen. With White Flag with Joe Walsh, he surrenders the urge to fight and strives to find a path to unite, not divide. But just so you get a sense right off the bat that this is a man with many dimensions and a great deal of passion. He's also the author of a book with one of my favorite titles ever, Fuck Silence, calling Trump out for the cultish, moronic, authoritarian con man that he is. Joe Walsh, what a thrill to meet you and talk with you. How are you doing?
Hey, Corey, my friend, it's awesome to be with you. Before we get started, I want to, everybody and their mother's got a podcast, but I want to commend what you're trying to do with this podcast, because we're so damn tribal in this country. And I love what you do, and I'm trying to do what you do, you know, get people, even people who disagree, talking. So good job, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, my brother was giving me some constructive feedback. We were going on a run where we're getting a bunch of people that, you know, we largely agree on a lot of different issues. And, you know, it's great to get along with folks that you agree with on a lot of stuff. But, you know, I as I was learning more about you and doing some research, getting ready for this, I found, listen, there's some subjects or policy positions that we disagree on. So maybe if we have time, we'll talk about some of that stuff. And that's where it's important to treat each other with dignity and respect.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciate your evolution and all that you're doing and your candor and your principles. So I would imagine that some of that comes from Susan and Charles Walsh and all those brothers and sisters that you grew up with. What was it like growing up in that household?
Obnoxious, a pain in the ass, a big old Irish Catholic family of 9. I love my mom and dad. They both passed away within the last couple of years. My mom was very political. I've always loved politics. Look, Corey, I'm on a mission because I really helped to divide this country the last 10 to 12 years. I think we are as divided now as we've been. I don't think we've been this divided since just before the Civil War. I think America's in trouble. I helped to do a lot of that the last 10 years. And now I'm trying to do something about that divide.
You know, I've heard you talk about, I'm going off script here, so bear with me, but I've heard you talk in interviews over the last year, 2 years about certain virtues. And many of us nowadays have forgotten some of those virtues, or maybe didn't have it in the first place. Virtues like boldness, or as you were talking, you didn't use this word, but I was thinking discernment, you know?
Yeah.
And it made me think of, we've talked a lot about cold Civil War and that sort of thing, but I was actually thinking about the time leading up to the Revolutionary War. One would have had to have had boldness and discernment and wisdom in order to understand how to align oneself and what's right and what's wrong, and how to make sense of what was going on in the world and our relationship with what was our country. We were the colonies of the UK. So I don't know, it's not a really well-formed thought, but as I was listening to a couple of your interviews, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, we need folks who are bold, who aren't afraid to put themselves into the thick of it, but also discernment and wisdom to figure out what's right and what's wrong.
Corey, it's a great point. Like during the revolution, when a lot of men and women risked everything and lost everything to give us this country, we're at a point now where we do need people to risk losing everything, I really believe, to try to save America. Now, I'm no great shakes. I stood up against Trump about 4 some years ago, and immediately I lost everything. My former political party right now is made up of way too many people who are just afraid to do that. So I think we're going to be in this thing for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, as I was thinking about what you've been through over the last 4 years or so, plus or minus, there was a Bible verse that came to mind. I hope you don't mind if I dive in here.
Not at all. For
what does it benefit a person to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? You know, what I was thinking of is when you were in the thick of it, pre-awakening, if you want to call it that, how close were you to losing your soul?
Every single day. Yes, I was on the precipice every single day. I could have gotten elected again and sent back to Congress. I could have been the next Rush Limbaugh. I could be on 400 stations around the country. I could have my own show on Fox News. This was all available to me and put in front of me every day. If you only do this, if you say this, and I couldn't do it. And so eventually, but that temptation was there every day. Look, I give a lot of people in my former worlds of conservative media and Republican politics a hard time, because 99% of them did in fact sell their soul. But I get it. It's really hard not to right now, because you end up like me, losing everything.
But there are folks like you, like Charlie Sykes, like Bill Kristol, who they had it all. I just talked to a terrific young man who was part of the foundation of the Lincoln Project, and then ultimately left the Lincoln Project. And he had to make decisions. He started politicology. I'm speaking of Ron Steslow.
Great guy.
Yeah. And he had to make that decision several times, where he was, one of the Fortune's 40 under 40 and all these things. And he could have had the whole world. But on principle, he had to say, you know what? I'm losing my soul. I have to be who I am. I have to follow what I know is right, despite what it costs me. So a couple questions there. One is,
let me jump in, Corey, and just quickly say one thing. And Ron's a great guy. Crystal's a great guy. Charlie Sykes is a great guy. I know all these guys in the never Trumper world. Here's what makes me a weird, unusual cat. I'm the only one I know who literally came from the Trump gang. I mean, I came from Trump world. I voted for Trump. The populist base of the Republican Party, that was me. I came from that world. And I often feel like a reformed gangbanger because I got out of that world. Sykes, Kristol, Ron Steslow, they were never part of that world. So I literally feel like I escaped the cult, and I did. That makes my journey kind of odd, weird.
Then again, there are some heroes that had that similar kind of story. Paul was Saul before he was Paul.
Yes. Yes.
He was holding the coats of the guys who were throwing stones, so there are some. I was also thinking, I don't know why, but what's his name? Tony Stark came to mind as well. Yeah. He was like making all the bombs before he figured out how to. But yes. So do you think there is redemption for others that are still in the thick of it? The Mark Levins, the Sean Hannitys, the Ben Shapiros. Do you think there's redemption there? Can they find their way out of the morass?
I don't think they will. Can they still? Yes. But I don't think they will. What's most disappointing is in that morass, in that cult, the gang that I came from, most people in that cult, in the media and Republican elected officials, they think the same way about Trump and Trumpism that I do. They just keep their mouths shut, or they avoid talking about it. Ben Shapiro's in that class. Shapiro can't stand Trump, but he's making money trying to avoid having to talk about Trump. But then you've got nuts and true believers like Hannity. Yeah. I mean, Hannity's a jerk. He believes it. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, they believe this stuff.
Yeah.
But most of them, Corey, in that world, they don't believe it. They've just decided to keep their mouths quiet.
Yeah, well, we'll get into quite a bit of that in a second. But I also wanted to take a little bit of time to talk a little bit more about your story. You grew up in a town north of about an hour and a half north of Chicago, depending on traffic, of course.
Yeah.
I was curious, you mentioned your mom, but were a lot of folks from North Barrington, where you grew up, did they tend to be conservative, libertarian leaning, or were there other influences that shaped your political beliefs?
No, it was white bread, middle class, middle upper class, country club kind of Republican. But I come from a family that's not political at all. I come from a family of 9 kids. I'm the only one in the 9 who really got political.
Oh,
I come from a world, Corey, where even I'm Catholic. You don't wear your religion on your sleeve. You're quiet about your religion. I come from the same world politically. Where I come from, you don't really talk about your politics. So what I've done the last 10 to 12 years, being very public, has kind of, it's been difficult for my family and a lot of people to accept.
Oh, wow. I'm only imagining folks coming up to them and having them account for stuff that you've said over the years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your work as a social worker, but I saw something that really caught my eye. You went to Strasbourg. You're a method acting guy.
Yes. I was just too damn lazy, Corey. I went out to LA and then I went out to New York. I studied at the Strasbourg Institute. I've always been enamored with the acting profession. I just didn't have the ethic to stay with it.
Oh, man. Well, I'm a Meisner and then Stella Adler guy. So
oh yeah,
we were arch rivals back in the day. They Stella and Strasbourg didn't like each other, but that might be for a whole other podcast.
That's a fascinating conversation.
Oh man, yeah, I became quite a student of that whole history from the group theater on forward. But so for you said you refer to yourself as I don't know how lazy you could be if you're getting a master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. So that led you into your social work. I'd love if you could share with our listeners, you were involved with some really fascinating projects in hard parts of Chicago. Can you share with our listeners what you did and some of the programs you were involved in?
I've grown up with the desire to serve. And you combine that with my general libertarian philosophy that it's not government's job to take care of my neighbor, it's my job. That's always been my philosophy. So I've done a lot of teaching. I've done a lot of social work. And I'm always asked, Joe, how the hell can you be a conservative and a social worker? Because it fits with my philosophy. I want to help those less fortunate than me. I don't want the government to. I spent a lot of time on Chicago's South Side helping inner city white, black, and brown kids get an education and find work. This notion of urban schools and how do we make our urban schools better has always been a question I've been obsessed with.
Now that you say that, it makes me wonder, you were probably doing social work in a same part of town where a young Barack Obama was doing community organizing. Did you ever come across each other pre-politics?
Did not. But yeah, the exact same neighborhood.
Wow.
Quite literally the South Side of Chicago where he did community organizing, but we missed each other by a few years.
Okay. Yeah. It makes you wonder, folks of goodwill who are doing good work among the neighborhoods. And then you could derive very different political positions on individual policies. But so it sounds like you were increasingly involved in politics through the 90s, but not initially as a candidate. I was curious why you decided to get involved at all. And when did you first have that notion to run for office?
I got married right away and I had kids right away. And so raising the kids became my mission. Look, Corey, I ran for Congress in 2010. I became kind of the face of the Tea Party movement. I ran for Congress for the same reason that a lot of Republicans back then ran. We were pissed off about all of the debt that we were placing on the backs of our kids and our grandkids. Both parties were responsible for that debt. Kind of crazy. It was like 9-10 trillion at the time. Now look at us. But I got angry. So I ran for Congress in a district held by a Democrat. I barely beat her. And then once I got to Washington, I was off to the races.
I have lots of questions now. Okay. So I would imagine that your run in 96 and then the one state legislature was at 98. Were your reasons different than when you eventually ran into 2010?
Corey, that's such an excellent question, because most people who run for office, I think, run for the wrong reasons, or they don't have a reason. I've always been drawn to people who run for office because they want to do something, not be something. I ran for Congress in 1996, I think, for the first time, and I had no shot to win. I lived in an overwhelmingly Democratic district, but the congressman there was 87 years old. He was first elected in 1948. He had never been back to the district. That just pissed me off. I thought it was so wrong. So I ran to be kind of like a citizen legislator. I
read about a couple of stunts that you pulled during that.
I loved it.
You paid somebody like $1,000. The first person who spots, what's his name, the 87-year-old in this district, because he was never in the district, and it took a while.
Never. He never came back home. So we gave his doorman $1,000 because his doorman was the first person to see him back home in the district.
That's funny.
I didn't have a chance to win, but I felt like even back then, there were a lot of people who were really frustrated with our political system 20 years ago. And my God, that's only magnified now.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned, so fast forward to 2010, when you won, if I have the numbers right, by less than 1/10%. So coincidence, but you won. I mean, you won in a pretty heavily, the prior, if you look at the track record of that district, it was pretty heavily, it was D plus a lot. So the fact that a Republican won, it was partly the Tea Party wave, that first midterm of Obama's presidency, first term. But I bring it up because I live in California 25. A guy named Mike Garcia won this district by 333 votes. And the funny thing is that when he was running, I looked at a lot of his positions and I said, I'm in alignment with a lot of these positions. But then when the election of 2020 happened and then January 6th happened, I think everybody had to reorient themselves. The other thing too, though, is that Mike won by less than 1/10%. About 350,000 people voted in this district. But now, instead of aligning with Kinzinger and Meyer and Cheney and finding opportunities to take a stand, even in Nancy Mace, who occasionally will take a principled stance, he has only appeared on Newsmax. He doesn't appear in anywhere that he might get a tough question. He's taken votes to overturn Arizona and Pennsylvania's electoral college votes. He's getting an F from the Democracy Report Card from the Bill Kristol's group. And this is as purple of a district as it can. So you were in a district like that that you won by the slimmest of margins. If you were in a district like that now and won an election now, what are some of those votes that maybe you would have taken some heat to stand on principle and take a tough vote?
Well, I think about it all the time, Corey. If I were still a Republican in Congress, I wouldn't be doing anything differently than I'm doing outside of Congress. I would have turned on Trump in a nanosecond. I would have called out Trump. I would have been the only Republican to vote to impeach Trump the first time. And so because I would have done all of that, there's no way on God's green earth I ever could have gotten elected in a Republican primary last time around or this next time around. Adam Kinzinger and I are good friends. We got elected together from the same state. He stepped down because he knows there's no room right now in this Republican Party for him. He knows that. Liz Cheney deep down knows that. But I give Adam a lot of credit because he's doing what he believes is right.
Well, I look at how your district was redrawn for the 2012 and also how his district is being redrawn for 2022. And there's a similar circumstance. You didn't have a lot of options in 2012 that gave you any sort of chance, similar to Congressman Kinzinger.
And what I did, Corey, was when I went to Washington in 2010, remember, I was a Republican, but I declared war on the Republican Party every bit as much as the Democrats. So I raised holy hell against both parties. So when it came to redrawing the districts 2 years later, they turned my district into a hardcore Democratic district. They literally drew it for Tammy Duckworth. So even though I was a congressman, I was a severe underdog.
Yeah, yeah. At what point now, the Tea Party movement initially started as a grassroots movement, but within a relatively short amount of time, it went the way of what they call astroturf or something like that. Did you see some of that happening right under your feet, or did you kind of get caught up in a wave during that time?
I saw it happening. I got elected by the wave. It was a real grassroots movement. I still, Corey, proudly cling to my Tea Party roots because for me, again, it was all about the debt. Once it became clear after about a year in Congress that Republicans didn't give a damn about the debt, then a lot of those folks back home, those grassroots folks, they became pretty disenchanted and turned off. And then, another 4 or so years later, Trump, the demagogue, came along and he tapped into that Tea Party movement, but he tapped into some of the uglier aspects of it.
Yeah. So actually, one of the things I've heard you talk about is how, I don't know if you would say it exactly this way, but when you were in Congress, you were pretty outspoken. You had a certain style of engagement. You're
being very diplomatic.
Well, but I think it was, you were more, first of all, I always go back to that household, the Walsh household that you grew up in. You had to be pretty, passionate and outspoken just to get a word in edgewise with all those brothers and sisters. So that might be part of it. But yeah, you can see that line, and it didn't start with you, but you were part of it. There was Rush Limbaugh that led to Fox News, that led to open the door for Newt Gingrich to be how he was, and later Sarah Palin how she was, to Congressman Joe Walsh, and then Donald fucking Trump, and even the inglorious MTG. So here's a question though: is there a way out of? Is there some version of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan for the 21st century? And if so, how do we get there?
Not with this Republican Party. Here's what we always have to remember. When we talk about Republican voters, the base of the party, we're primarily talking about older white men and older white women. And the problem, Corey, is for years and years, the base of the party, they were really scared and concerned and worried about the direction the country was going in. The country was changing way too fast for them. The party establishment ignored them. Along came Tea Party people like me, and we riled these people up. Once Trump got there and he said, I'm going to build a wall and I'm keeping brown and black people out. Man, once he said that, Corey, he basically radicalized these folks. So I engage with these people every day. Remember, this is what makes me different than Nichols and Crystal and Sykes and all of them. They're my family, these Trump supporters. So I still speak to hundreds of them every day. Most of them, Corey, cannot be reached. They're unreachable. Some are, but most of them will never be reached.
Yeah, I think of Madrid last year. Mike Madrid was talking about that small percentage of people, whether it's 2% or 4%, it's a small percentage of people. But listen, That's what won Pennsylvania. That's what won Michigan.
Yes.
That's what won Wisconsin. So it does. And also I've, as an apologist, a theological apologist, I know that oftentimes when you're talking to people about big, important things, you're not going to see a 180 in one conversation.
Right.
If you stay in that conversation like you are, you can see degrees. But here's what I love about one of the many things I love about your new program, White Flag, is that you also then have to be opening to listening and developing some more nuance in your own views as you're staying in relationship and conversation with these people who disagree with you. But I have a question about that, because we don't often try to put ourselves in the shoes or understand better people that we passionately disagree with. Before I moved out to Jersey, my family was in this blue collar neighborhood in Staten Island, and we love our next door neighbors.
Yeah.
But I know a bunch of those the Italian family next door, a bunch of them were big Trump supporters in 2016. And we've talked a lot about whether it's the hillbilly elegy, explanations. We've talked about 2016. I'd love for you to help us understand the 2020 and the continued support after everything that's happened. For whether it's pre-2016, I like my heroes who didn't get captured, to grabbing her by the private parts, but then post, and this is where you began to, I don't know if it was Charlottesville or Helsinki, but then after all, the Lafayette Square, and then January 6th, that's what's a lot harder to understand, is how folks are still standing by this.
Trump got elected in 2016, Corey, because our politics sucks. Our political system was broken. I voted for Trump in 2016, not because I liked him. I figured he was a goof, but I understood that our political system needed disruption. It's something I've been talking about for years. Now, Trump's a horrible human being, so we didn't need that kind of disruption. But he won because he was a disruptor. By 2020, Corey, almost all of his support was, again, I know other people have said this, I experienced it, and I experience it still every day. It is a cult. I'm telling you, the base of the party is a cult. So they cling to him no matter what. I campaigned against him in the presidential primary. I remember being in Iowa campaigning against Trump. I asked 40 Trump supporters in a row, has Donald Trump ever told a lie? Ever told a lie? 40 of them told me no. Do they all believe it? I don't know, but they are members right now of a cult, and that support will not be broken. I will only add one other piece. The Democrats have issues. Most Americans, Corey, don't want to be in the Trump cult, but most Americans do not consider themselves to be crazy leftist either. And if the Democrats don't focus on where most Americans are, Trump's got a decent chance of winning again in 24.
Yeah. I mean, I was very encouraged by the way that the Democratic primary went in 2020. I was really rooting for a neighbor of yours, Mayor Pete, but out of that primary. But, Biden, I thought was a good solution. I probably would have ended up voting for, some of the folks who are further left. I probably would have. But it would have been a thought. I'm not really a thought, because of how passionately I felt and how urgent I felt it was to replace Trump. I just thought that would be ruinous for our country. But I did want to ask you about, I want to skip back a little bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks ask you about the Musket tweets and the, Black Lives.
My favorite tweet, Corey. That's my favorite tweet.
I don't want to, I'd rather talk about how you've evolved on numerous issues, as well as in your personal style, but I will give you a chance to beat yourself up a little bit. So are there certain things you said in the past that in particular exchanges?
God, yes. Oh, Corey, I'll tell you what, it's an amazing experience running for president, because you literally walk around naked every day. And every inch of you is looked at. I spent most of that presidential campaign apologizing for hundreds of tweets and hundreds of things I've said. I have been very outspoken, probably 500,000 tweets in the last 10 years. you and I could find 2,000 or 3,000 tweets. Yeah, where you, Corey, you'd say, what the hell were you thinking, Walsh? Because I got so wrapped up in the fight I was in, oftentimes I went over my skis. And oftentimes I engaged in ugly personal politics and said things I regret. I think about Obama. I went there and said things about Obama. Like people today, Corey, if they disagree with Ilhan Omar or AOC, a lot of these stupid Republicans today will say, Ilhan Omar hates America. I remember saying that about Obama 7 or 8 years ago, instead of saying, no, Obama doesn't hate America. He and I just differ on some things. So I said things like that I would never say now that I regret. Just personalizing, just ugly personal politics, which, by the way, helped give us Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like I said, obviously you have evolved your, on issues, your position on climate change, your Black Lives Matter, your view of Donald Trump. But I was curious, what was the personal epiphany like? Like, how did you, because it's so easy to get caught up in the battle. Like, to your point, you're saying a lot of people who are still following Donald Trump after all this they're in a cult. You just get caught up in it and you throw some bombs. And if you think about it just even for a second, you're thinking, well, those people are so bad. We got to do this. This is what we have to do. How did you get that space and perspective to say, whoa, hold on. I have to now work towards this is the problem. The way that we engage is the problem. And now I have to work towards fixing that problem. How did that happen for you?
And by the way, Jim Jordan and I used to be best friends. What you just said right there, Corey, that's how Jim Jordan and a lot of these Republicans think.
I look at Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes wasn't a guy that was, licking Trump's boots and sneaking out of Ubers to go and sneak into the White. He wasn't that guy when he first got elected, a couple districts north of me. So,
not at all. You're right. Nunes sold his soul. I mean, and recently he just sold his soul
again,
by leaving Congress. But they all know Trump is bad, but they've all said to me privately, but the Democrats are worse, socialists are evil, blah, blah, blah. What woke me up was Trump, plain and simple. Like, if I engaged in ugly personal politics the last 10 years, too often, every now and then, watching Trump get elected and then really paying attention to him after he got elected and understanding that every damn day, every time he opened his mouth, he was cruel, hateful, bigoted, ignorant, authoritarian, cultish, all the rest. It slapped me silly. The election of Trump woke me up and began to get me out of the cult. I've said often, Corey, people ask me all the time, how the hell did you vote for him in 2016? Because I would criticize him back then. He blocked me on Twitter back in 2016. But my answer always is I didn't pay enough attention to him until he got elected. And then once I did, I said, oh my God, have I even sounded like 100th of as bad as Trump is? It kind of cleaned me up and got me sober.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, there should be some kind of trophy for that. Like, it's like an accomplishment if you've gotten blocked on Twitter by Trump.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, I see some of what's happening now. You mentioned Democrats. There are certain Democrats, high profile Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin, and they are getting attacked by some folks, as if there has to be some sort of purity test to have a D before your name or an R before your name. So to be clear, you still have what used to be considered conservative or libertarian positions on immigration, the Second Amendment, and title reform. Am I right about that? Or,
Corey, I am generally the same libertarian conservative that I was when I went to Congress 10 years ago. I'm proudly woke. Wokeness is a good thing. I've learned, I've opened my eyes on issues like climate and race relations, but generally I'm still a principled small government libertarian. I've completely changed my tone.
Yeah. 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 And, I'd like to think that there's room for that. I will give you one example and one reason why I feel confident about if Christy Smith does win the nomination again for this district, even though she and I disagree on about 75% of what she'd actually be voting on.
Yeah.
When she was in the state legislature, I met her at a community thing in the Central Park here in Santa Clarita. And I introduced myself by saying, "Hi, Christy, I didn't vote for you twice." And she said, "Oh, that's okay. I mean, it's a democracy. That's how it goes. What were some of the things?" And for me, I'm a small business owner. So I told her a couple of things that she supported that really wasn't in my best interest. And we talked about it for a bit. She gave me her reasoning. But she went a step further. When she was an assemblywoman here in California, she invited me to be part of her small business committee. And listen, to be fair, I didn't get to dictate everything that she was working for or language that she got into legislation, but I had some influence. I saw some of the language that I was fighting for, some of the compromise and my voice, it meant that my voice actually mattered, even though we disagree. And what I also learned was that the process by which she arrives at her decisions on what to vote for has integrity, even if I do disagree with where she lands. So I would rather vote for somebody that I might vote differently 75% of the time, that still believes in the process and democracy itself, than these extremists who are just, as it turns out, as you describe it, cultists.
Corey, has that district changed at all with redistricting?
Well, there are drafts. I don't think it's been finalized yet, but it looks like they're going to include Simi Valley, which is very, I don't know what the exact number is, but I think that part of California 25 is R+3 or +5. That's why it was so close in the last election.
Right. So
if they include that as part of, say, the Camarillo portion, it will turn from a D+5 to maybe a D+7 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's still in draft phase, so we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. If that's the case, I think Christie has a pretty clear path.
Yeah.
But it's still essentially, especially this area, Santa Clarita Valley, is still a very purple district. So I do have. I was reading through Fuck Silence, and it's only your voice could write a book like that as a former congressman, a former Republican. But also someone who, like we said, still has conservative and libertarian positions. So you do spell out a number of huge problems that ail us as a country. I was really intrigued. There's a whole set of chapters about how to fix some of these problems. And I'll just share, if anybody in our audience does get a chance to pick it up, it's definitely a fun but also a productive read. So those chapters are fixing the presidency, fixing conservatism, fixing the debt, fixing trade, fixing immigration. So not that we can tackle all of those, but say, the presidency or conservatism, can you spell out a little bit of what your prescriptions might be of how to fix some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think, Corey, one thing that jumps out to me is, and this is a bipartisan problem, our founders did not envision the presidency to be what it is today. Our founders would be aghast if they saw how powerful the president of this country is. Congress, the legislative branch that I was part of, that our founders believed should be paramount, needs to reestablish itself and reassert itself. And I worry that might be it might be too late, but they've got to grab back a hell of a lot of the power that over the years they've ceded to the presidencies. I felt Obama had too much power when he was president. Trump took that and ran with it. A big part of that is Congress isn't pushing back. It's a big pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, you do spell out a couple times in the book. I think it was Meadows, or it was Mulvaney, who when it was Obama, and he said the thing about the phone and the pen. He even said he was prescient. If it was a Republican, we'd have the opportunity to look like principled if we push back on it. He ends up being his chief of staff for a short time, and he didn't push back on it. He didn't take the opportunity to be principled about it.
See, Corey, that's a great example, and that's what makes me so sad. Mick Mulvaney and I were best friends.
Yeah.
And Mick Mulvaney is a tough, smart, principled guy. I didn't recognize him at all when he worked for Trump. It just saddens me how those people changed who they were to try to fit in with this guy. It saddens me.
Yeah. Well, one of my other questions is whether you sound more bullish on the possibility of a robust third party. How realistic do you think that is? And how long will it take? How could that happen?
Well, I think it's going to happen naturally. I had Andrew Yang on my podcast early, and he's already out there with another party. 10 years ago, I was talking about at town halls, give me a third, a fourth, a fifth party right now. This two-party thing is broken, period. So it's going to happen. The problem right now is we have this unique existential threat. One of our two major political parties has become an anti-democracy party. So whereas I wrote a piece, I think for the New York Times a year and a half ago, let's plant our flag and start a third party now. I'm of the opinion, Corey, now that we all have to help the Democrats because the Democrats are the only game in town to stop this fascist party. So I think it's coming, but I think right now our battle is against Trump and Trumpism.
Yeah, one of your points, not just about with the book, but also there was a podcast that called "Fuck Silence," and part of the point about it is that it's not just about the small number of people who voted for impeachment in the Republican caucus, or took votes who resisted to take those votes to overturn Arizona and Pennsylvania's electoral college. It's about the ones who are silent. The 150 or so Republicans who are silent. Now, there are some who are freaking nuts, the Boberts and the MTGs, and there are some who are legitimately nuts. But what I wonder about that is I wonder if, say, a Nancy Mace is closer to Congresswoman Spanberger than she is to an MTG, at least in terms of personal ethic and political philosophy. I wonder if Gottheimer is closer in philosophy to Congressman Katko up in New York than Katko would be to what's his name, Gohmert or somebody like that.
Yeah.
And again, it's maybe they voted because Kinzinger, like if you look at his actual voting record, Congressman Kinzinger, like 95% along with Trump during Trump's term, dude's a conservative. But at the end of the day, if we don't have democracy, if we're memory holding people literally storming the Capitol and hitting, violently attacking policemen and women, we don't have a democracy. We can't take a vote on fiscal policy or foreign policy. Anyway, that's sorry.
Corey, keep going, man. I mean, preach, preach, preach. I'm pretty good friends with Eric Swalwell. He and I talk regularly. And every time he talks to me, Corey, he says, Joe, join the Democratic Party, formally join us, you and Adam and Liz. And I don't, because I think I can keep helping Democrats by not being a Democrat. But Eric understands that this is one of those unique moments in American history where we all have to put our policy differences aside, lock arms, and defend democracy.
What's funny is between the Democratic, the DNC in August of 2020 and January 6th, I had a little mini evolution in my thinking. I was very encouraged to see Colin Powell and Meg Whitman and my former governor, Christine Todd Whitman, and several longstanding Republicans speak at the DNC. Yeah. And I was actually rooting for what I thought of as a center holds election in November. I was encouraged because it looked like the Senate was going to stay in Republican hands. And even though Democrats were going to lose some seats in Congress, they'd hold the House. I was encouraged by that. But then, like the day after the election, when Trump started saying what he was saying about the election, and it's certainly by January 6th, I was really glad. I was really relieved that it was, a Democrat across the board. And I never registered as a Republican, but as a conservative, libertarian leaning independent, I didn't care. I didn't care about for now, I have to put my concerns about the debt aside because democracy is at stake.
Agreed. And look, we don't get to pick when the Almighty puts us on this planet, but we're here now. We're in this country now, and our democracy is more threatened now than it's been, I think, again, since the Civil War.
Yeah.
And so I'm still a pretty hardcore Tea Party conservative, but I will probably spend the next 2 to 4 years homeless, but doing all I can to help Democrats win, because that fascist party over there needs to be defeated.
Yeah, and the difference, though, is that I think that within the Democratic caucus right now, even though there's some passionate debates about whether to pass the BBB with the, with the infrastructure bill, all these debates that we've been hearing for the last few months, they're still at the table together. And even on some of the most difficult issues, an AOC can still, at the end of the day, maybe find some common ground with some of the folks toward the center of the party.
Hey, Corey, man, that's the sign of a healthy political party. Having real, genuine, passionate fights and debates about policy.
Yeah.
That's going on in the Democratic Party. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
In the Republican Party, they don't even have they don't have a platform. It's just all about supporting Trump. You either support him or you don't. And if you don't, you're not a viable Republican anymore.
I forgot to ask you about this, but I think part of the reason is that there isn't just a permission structure. There is such a hostile environment to be an independent voice. You've talked about losing everything. You've also talked about, getting dozens, hundreds, thousands of hate mail and even death threats. I was curious, first of all, obviously you've lost a great deal, a national syndicated radio program, the support of the Republican Party. Did losing everything go beyond that? And then I want to ask you some specific questions about the hate mail.
It was the most difficult thing I've ever done, but the easiest thing. It was the most difficult thing because I knew, Corey, the minute I publicly came out against Trump, I knew I was going to lose my livelihood. I was going to lose my career. I was going to lose any future in the Republican Party, and I was going to lose any future in conservative media. I was going to lose friends, family members, and supporters, and I would get death threats every day for the next 10 years. So in one sense, I knew I was going to stare at all of that, and that's hard. But then, Corey, it was the easiest decision I ever made because I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't just follow my head and follow my heart.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, aren't there still voices like Paul Ryan being on the board at Fox News? Isn't there some set of individuals with principle that could put their heads together and say, hey, guys, this is really crazy town, whether it's key figures at major media giants like Fox News, key figures in politics, the key voices in culture and business that can get together and say, hey, can we create a permission structure for independent voices, still conservative, still libertarian, but independent voices? Or is the only road for that the truly independent media platforms like Dispatch and Bulwark and White Flag with Joe Walsh?
Yeah, Corey, I think it's too late. And by the way, screw Paul Ryan. I served with Paul Ryan. I used to respect the hell out of Paul Ryan. You talk about the poster child for an influential Republican who has kept his mouth shut these 5 years. Who's Joe Walsh? I'm nobody. And I ran for president against Trump. Paul Ryan should have challenged Trump. Mitt Romney should have challenged Trump. Paul Ryan kept his mouth shut. And there are so many like him. So no, I think, Corey, it's too late because people like Ryan and the rest of them, they're waiting for Trump to blow over. If they have to wait another 4 years, they'll do it.
Yeah.
And then they know the establishment will accept a Paul Ryan again. They'll never accept somebody like me. So and Ryan's a young guy. A lot of them just believe, Corey, they can wait out Trump and even wait out Trumpism.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would like to ask you too about the hate mail. Every once in a while, because we're called politics and religion, something or other, we'll do a post and get, several comments, sometimes several hundred comments. And within those, there's some real hateful stuff. I haven't been, threatened with death, thank goodness. But I can only imagine but the funny thing is I have noticed that some of the most pointed, hateful stuff never comes with an actual name on it. So I was wondering are these just keyboard warriors? Do they put their names to it, or what's the nature of some of this hate mail? What might be some examples of it?
It's probably all of the above with me. Again, from the beginning, and it was building because I was never a rah-rah Trump guy. And remember, Corey, again, unlike all the other never Trumpers, I come from the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
And I was in the belly of the beast preaching to these people, and I was kind of indifferent toward Trump. But the moment I said Donald Trump is bad and he's got to be defeated, the threats began. And I'm sure there are plenty of them that are just, as you say, keyboard warriors, but there were plenty that were serious, and you've got to report the serious ones. And it's something you have to live with if you're a publicly outspoken conservative against Trump.
Yeah. So you've had to refer some of these to
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Man, I would imagine if I was in that position, it would be challenging if it was just me, but you're also married, you have kids and, a wonderful wife. I would imagine it's even harder when you think about, your family.
You said something to start this show. I think you were talking about the founders and everything they went through to birth this thing. I've always been obsessed with the founding of this nation. There's a part of me, Corey, that has always believed in reincarnation. And I swear I was around during the revolution. But you think about what those men and women consciously did. I'm going to risk my life. I'm going to risk everything to start a new nation based on freedom. I would think that a lot over these last 4 or 5 years. And that would give me strength to endure a lot of what I've had to endure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been inspired by the founders, if for no other reason. I got this whole Alexander Hamilton thing going right now.
I love it.
or the white. I'm white haired, like George Washington. But
when did you turn white? When did your hair really turn?
I was starting to go gray in my early 20s.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, it's a gradual thing. So yeah, definitely. I remember going back home. We live on the West Coast now, and going back home and seeing one of my buddies that I grew up with, took my hat off after we got off the plane. He was like, dude, you were freaking gray. Stuff like that. I was maybe in my mid 30s at that point. So wow, it's been going on for a while. The Steve Martin thing. Yeah.
Love it.
But we share the platinum, so I respect.
Yes.
You know what it tells me when a guy who's relatively young like yourself is going gray? It tells me you're the real deal. Like you don't need to cover this up. You be you. So I respect that.
But full disclosure, Corey, I tried it. I think one time I tried Just for Men, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I tried to dye my hair 10, 15 years ago. I got it all over my skin. My skin turned black. I said, no way am I going to do this.
Well, so full disclosure, I tried that one time too, and it was my wife's prompting. And I'm such a shallow guy in some sentences. I'm like, hey, would it get me lucky a little bit more?
Exactly.
Often? Like she's like, yeah, baby, come. But no, I mean, so I was like, no, let's just let it go.
Let it go.
Yeah. So one of the cultural epidemics that hits close to home for you is cancel culture.
Yeah.
I heard you say in a recent interview that it really takes people from within a certain group to call out their own group, like leading Democrats to call out the excesses, of some of those who've gone too far. So I was curious. I was recently embroiled in a very heated set of exchanges after Dave Chappelle's latest comedy special. Now, I watched the whole thing. I found some of the content to be really hard to sit through. I found it offensive, frankly, but I support free expression. and I oppose those who are trying to deplatform him.
Yeah.
I was curious. So I was curious if you followed that, because of everything that you've gone through, what your thoughts about it are, and where does that come, like more broadly, just like, you're kind of an amateur student of sociology. Like, where does that come from more broadly, and how do we deal with it?
I think, Corey, that we've become so easily offended. We've become so intolerant. And it's not just the left, it's not just the right. I'm a liberal and a conservative comes to speak on my college campus. I need to shut that speech down. Both sides do it. And I think the sad thing is, I generally, Corey, have always subscribed to the antiquated notion that sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I am an unfettered free speech guy. Dave Chappelle's got a right to say whatever the heck he wants. You've got a right to go to his show or not go to his show or protest his show or criticize his show. That's all good. And that's the way I think a mature country handles words that offend us. But when you then try to go get somebody fired or you try to get a speech stopped, I think that's a step too far. And I think that's the sign of an immature country. And I'm worried because we've been in this place for a while.
Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction where you draw the line somewhere around where you are impeding others' basic freedoms. Self-evident freedoms, if you will. That's interesting.
Look, and Corey, you know this, and I got a right to offend you with speech. I'm always amazed, Corey, by the number of people, primarily on the left, who don't understand that hate speech is the very speech that the First Amendment protects. My right to say anything I want about you or me or Christians or Jews or atheists. But there are so many people in this country who believe that hate speech ought to be outlawed. That's scary.
Yeah, I saw a list of some of the cases that the Anti-Defamation League took up, and I think it would surprise some folks, some of those cases, because we often tend to associate the ADL with liberal causes.
Yeah.
But it's liberalism or free speech. And sometimes that free speech is from folks who we really passionately disagree with, but free speech is primary, right? If we don't have free speech, everything else is out the window. If we don't have,
if I were with you right now, I'd kiss you on your forehead. I will defend anybody's right to speak their mind and say their piece. And the only way you defeat speech that makes you uncomfortable is through other speech. You express speech, you protest speech, but man, don't try to outlaw speech.
Yeah. So I'd be, you might kiss me on the forehead, but if I didn't go in a different direction here, my brother would smack me on the forehead next time he sees me. So there are two, there's a number of things that we probably disagree on policy wise, but there were two in particular that I came across that I think we diverge pretty far. And listen, I am not a policy wonk so much as I start with philosophical, or more specifically, theological convictions.
Good.
And theologically, because of what I believe and what I've derived from Scripture, which is my main basis for, just studying stuff and transcendent wisdom and good and bad and all that stuff, guns and immigration. How did you arrive at first of all, articulate what your position, broadly speaking, is on guns and immigration? And two, how did you arrive at those convictions?
Let me start with immigration, because you and I may actually agree on immigration. I don't believe anybody should come to America illegally. I believe America should open up her arms to anybody seeking asylum. That's a legal process. I'm one of those former Republicans, Corey, who wants to open our arms to greater numbers of legal immigrants, because that's how we regenerate and make America better. So expand legal immigration, But man, you got to have, and look, the wall is an overrated, overblown thing, but you got to defend your border. Are you and I far apart on immigration?
Actually, maybe I didn't understand it. Actually, we're probably closer to it. So, Leviticus 19 is an interesting chapter because if you really want to take it close to what it's saying is you basically be an open border guy. Not that I'm an open border guy.
Yeah.
But I think where I'm at is I want to make it a hell of a lot easier to come in, partly because of where I am fiscally. It's like we want to broaden the tax base, let good folks in who want to work and pay taxes and,
amen,
do their fair share. But it's so freaking hard for people to actually legally get in.
Do you know, Corey, yeah, amen. And I'm with you. Make the process of becoming a legal immigrant easier. Right now, I think on average, it averages about 9 to 10 years and costs about $27,000 to get into this country legally. That's ridiculous. So make that process easier. And I think we need to expand our legal immigration. Now, on guns, you and I, let me tell you just where I'm coming from on guns. I will defend your First Amendment rights until I drop. I also am a firm believer in our Second Amendment rights as well. My God-given, my constitutional freedom to defend myself and my family and my property. That's generally where my gun beliefs come. I think when it comes to guns, we ought to focus on, and I think this is where there's compromise, focus on keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them at the start, instead of trying to outlaw certain guns or ban certain guns from legal gun owners. I think that's a non-starter. What's your take on guns?
So again, I come from much more of a theological perspective. My reading of, in particular, the part of the story where Jesus enters in the Gospels, Jesus' path to victory was through the cross. It wasn't through the spear, the Roman army overtaking the Roman. His path to victory is an upside down victory, as we would understand it. So that leads me to look to figures who used non-violent resistance. In recent history, figures like Dr. King, Gandhi. But then again, there were other really heroic figures throughout our history, like Abraham Lincoln. He really wished he could avoid a civil war. But at the end of the day, sometimes you got to take up your gun.
And Corey, my gun philosophy comes from this. As long as a gun, say a handgun, is a legal product that law-abiding Americans can purchase, then by golly, that 27-year-old African-American mom on Chicago's South Side who has to take 2 buses and walk 2 miles to get home from work through a crime-ridden, gang-infested neighborhood, she should have a right to carry that legal product to keep herself safe. And no one should tell me she shouldn't have that ability as long as she's properly trained.
Yeah, that's fair. See, I think that even though I come from a pretty far place theoretically than you do, I feel like there is a place at the table to have conversations, because I know, look, at the end of the day, there is a line somewhere. Like you wouldn't say that, there should be private ownership of nuclear weapons that could destroy, so there's a line somewhere. I don't know if it's AR-15 or before you actually get a nuclear bomb, but
and it's a good point, Corey. And pretty much the line that society has drawn, American society, the last 100 years, is to outlaw machine guns, say, fully automatic guns, where all you do is press that finger on the Twitter and rat-tat-tat-tat, they go.
Yeah.
That's the line. And I understand that there are good, well-intentioned people who would like to ban semi-automatic guns. I just don't think that's ever gonna happen.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we get there, though, is that can we agree on what the real conversation is? Sometimes I was sitting across the table. I went to this industry function, and a guy had tattooed on his forearm, I think it was the Greek translation of "come and take them." So he literally tattooed it on his arm, and I'm like, hey, dude. A little secret here. Nobody's coming to take your freaking guns. We couldn't even agree on the the preface to the conversation, let alone the conversation itself. So I felt like there's not really common ground there. But if we can agree on reality, then maybe we can sit down and talk about background checks or something like that, you know?
Totally, Corey, and that's the way to go. I had on White Flag, I had Fred Gutenberg on a few weeks ago. He lost his daughter in the Florida school shooting back in 2018. And we sat down for an hour, and he and I don't agree on damn near anything when it comes to guns, but we found a little common ground on, as you said, trying to do something, beefing up background checks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have heard you say that people who shouldn't, who've been deemed unfit, you know, whether it's mental illness or if they've been charged with violent crimes, I think I've heard you correctly, that folks who shouldn't have a gun shouldn't have a gun.
That's where our focus should be, is up front, doing whatever we can do to make sure guns stay out of those hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not easy, though. Again, Corey, part of the problem is we live in an open, free society, and there are bad, evil people in this society. And boy, it's awful hard to legislate away evil or regulate away evil.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I could do this all day. So I only have a couple questions left for you. The first of them is, do you have any questions for me?
Yes, I have two. Concisely, why did you launch this podcast, your podcast?
Because I think more than any specific policy set of differences or any specific policy that we've been arguing about forever, one of the greatest ills of our culture and our country is how we talk to each other and how
Amen.
we view each other. And someone who might think I'm religious, who happens to be agnostic or atheist, if all they know is I'm religious, it's been happening just recently. They make all these other assumptions about who I am. They have one piece of information, and then they get to generalize and demonize me based on that one piece of information. So I wanted to participate in a set of conversations because I know some people are doing it so much better than I am, to such wider audiences than I am, including you. But I think the more that we have these sorts of conversations among people who have certain differences, I had Christy on the program, who I hope is going to be our next congressman here. You know, the more we have these conversations, and people that I disagree with religiously, with theologically, the more we have these conversations, we'll get into that exercise. And if there's just one person listening who adds 1 degree of nuance to one position, I think we've done some good work. But I think that is the most urgent, imperative work that we need to do as a culture.
Perfectly put. Perfectly put. I have two more for you.
Oh.
Are you bearish or bullish on the future of this American experiment?
It's not an either or question.
Okay.
I would put more of a percentage on it. I think it would not surprise. I don't think it's a majority possibility that within 10 years, we do not have a democracy as we know it. But I think it's more than a remote possibility. In fact, I would put it at least in double digits, if not as.
Oh, I'm a big dog guy, Corey. What kind of dog is that?
So that's Charles. He's a mutt. He's a rescue.
Yes.
Charles Mingus III. And then we also have Bailey, who just got an operation. She's like the Franken dog right now. So,
oh my God,
but she's doing great. She's
awesome.
So
awesome.
So I mean, there's a significant chance. I think it's at least in double digits, maybe as high as 25% chance that we don't have democracy as we know it, depending on who's running Congress in 2022, depending on who's in the White House in 2024, and even if those things go in a pro-democracy direction, I think there's still dangers that we have to work really, really hard to avoid.
Okay, final question. You believe there is some form of existence after this existence?
I do.
Do you believe that when you pass and you leave this earth and you move on to that next existence, do you believe that you will be aware of the fact that you've moved on to a new existence? Or does that not make sense?
It makes perfect sense. So
I wrestle with that one, Corey.
Well, again, I really do. At a certain point, I deferred to what I was deriving in scripture as my main source of how I'm forming my beliefs in big questions like these. Because I wrestled for I didn't become a Christian until I was 29 years old. So I wrestled with these existential questions for a long time before I started to at least go down a path. And as you well know, like every answer that you arrive at, it just opens up 12 more questions or 12,000 more questions. But this is the best I can say on that, is that scripture to me, the story of Jesus to me indicates that there's a very this worldly redemption project happening. When Jesus rose from the dead, his actual physical body rose from the dead.
Yes.
If you read Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelation 21 and 22, he's not talking about some otherworldly, just purely unphysical. He's talking about this creation and the process of redeeming this creation. And part of the reason that I believe in that is because it makes what we're doing right now, it makes it more important, frankly, because we're participating in that redemption project right now. Yeah. So, your specific question, am I going to be aware of, in that next chapter of whatever existence is? I think, because I think we're laying the groundwork now. It'll be very different, obviously.
Interesting.
But yeah, I do think there's an element to that.
Corey, thank you. That's interesting. I like that. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So how can we find you online? More information about White Flag with Joe Walsh and all the other cool stuff that you're doing.
It's just simple. For anybody who tweets, follow me at Walsh Freedom, at Walsh Freedom. The new podcast is called White Flag with Joe Walsh. You go wherever you listen or listen to your podcast, White Flag with Joe Walsh.
And some really great guests on there. Your conversation with Congressman Kinzinger was great. I haven't listened to the one with Jane Lynch yet, but really
she's a hoot, Corey. You'll like that. She's a hoot.
Yeah, that'll be great. And as always, if you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, leave us a review and comments wherever you get your podcasts. And most importantly, tell a friend about us. Now go talk politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week. Thank you for joining us today. If you appreciate what you heard here, please go to iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts, give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. That really helps move us up the chart so others can find out what we're up to here. For Ronnie Nathan, I'm Corey Nathan, and we've been talking politics and religion without killing each other. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.